You think you know how these stings go down. Cops post an ad for an underage teen, wait for predators to respond, then arrest them when they show up in person.
If I had Grady's World, they'd all go to prison.
But what so many of our local law enforcement leaders are not telling you is that they've had to try harder and harder over the years to trick men into showing up. 10 Investigates has learned through court documents and arrest reports that law enforcement is now reaching out themselves to young men who did nothing more than post an ad on a traditional dating site. Cops form a rapport, then switch their age and try to trick the sometimes hesitant men to keep on talking. It's a tactic local judges are lashing out against.
The government made a concerted effort to lure him into committing a crime.
The officer failed to follow the procedure.
The law does not tolerate government action to provoke a law-abiding citizen to commit a crime.
A recent Manatee County case was dismissed because undercover officers kept baiting a young man into talking about sex over the phone.
I don't know, what could you teach me?
The judge ruled entrapment.
What do you want me to wear?
And said the approach had no place in modern-day law enforcement. Polk County Sheriff Grady Judd oversees all West and Central Florida sting operations.
There's concern that when detectives are going after men who are posting legal ads on legal sites, that's crossing the line.
The concern is that you inflate your investigative reporting to make it glitzy. Go talk to the mamas of these babies that are being stalked online.
I would say I am one of those mamas.
10 Investigates agreed to conceal the identity of this local mother whose son was targeted in a predator roundup. He was 22 when he responded to an ad of a 26-year-old woman, but she drew him in, then switched her age to 13. He didn't believe her and took her up on the offer to meet. He was arrested, and now he'll forever be known as a sexual offender.
He had a life of promise. He had an education. All that's been shot.
She says opportunistic lawmen are ignoring real problems in favor of a good press conference. In fact, 10 Investigates got a hold of the federal agreement for these task forces, and on a list of ranked priorities, predator stings comes in dead last. That's why Pasco County Sheriff Chris Nocco has his detectives focus on other areas of cybercrime, like child porn and human trafficking. He says predator stings are time-consuming, expensive, and ultimately not worth it if detectives have to bend the rules to get arrests.
You spend your resources, you arrest somebody, and then they walk right out. It's the biggest waste ever.
Coming up tomorrow night in part 2 of our investigation, we'll show you how most of the men facing a lifetime of discipline and shame aren't the middle-aged predators law enforcement wants you to believe. They're young men, many of them teenagers, who are simply trying to meet women their own age. In the newsroom, Noah Pransky, 10 Investigates.
As I say in my world, these guys have a hitch in their giddy-up.
We're used to seeing local sheriffs trot out mugshots and video of accused child predators. And you probably have an idea in your head of what they look like.
We call him the creeper.
But 10 Investigates analyzed records for more than 1,200 men arrested in these stings in Florida since 2006, and most of them had no record of previous sexual crimes. Furthermore, look at what happens when we sort the number of arrests by age. Most of the men willing to chat with the teenagers aren't in their 50s, 40s, or 30s. They're in their 20s, their early 20s, or teenagers themselves, like Joseph, whose identity we've agreed to disguise.
They had me call them. I sat on the phone for an hour with a grown woman who was talking to me in a very seductive manner.
He was 22 when he had his first and only run-in with the law. He thought he was talking to a 26-year-old online who even sent this photo, wedding ring and all. But after baiting him in, she switched her age from 26 to 13. Joseph thought she had to have been kidding, so he took her up on her offer to meet.
I walked into a house and was thrown into handcuffs.
He's serving 2 years of house arrest, then the equivalent of a life sentence, since he's now labeled a sexual offender. Sarasota defense attorney Anthony Ryan just had a case dismissed after officers tricked his 23-year-old client in Manatee County.
They are really good at subtly turning conversations and normal statements into sexual innuendo.
A judge ruled entrapment, saying the approach had no place in modern-day law enforcement. Ryan says not only are they trying to fool men who would have never otherwise chatted with a teenager, but cops are also responding to legal ads on traditional dating sites, all in an effort to boost arrest numbers.
Once the low-hanging fruit is sort of gone and has been taken off the tree, there's still pressure from high above to justify these actions.
Other recent trends include stings that specifically target members of the military. It's the blurring of these ethical and legal lines that have prompted the South Florida Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force to all but quit the stings, instead focusing on more significant areas of online child abuse. But here in West Central Florida, the operations are alive and well under the watchful eye of Task Force leader Grady Judd. He says they're necessary to protect the kids who may stray onto adult websites. At his last press conference, however, he couldn't prove it was actually a widespread problem.
Are there a lot of children doing that?
Not a lot, there are some.
Again, we want to emphasize sex offenders need to be dealt with, and anyone preying on children should be arrested and prosecuted. But there also needs to be transparency about how law enforcement handles these stings. Polk County Sheriff Grady Judd has refused to turn over what we consider public records on these cases, leaving lingering questions about how many more men were minding their own business until law enforcement contacted them. We're also curious what you think. Go to 10 News Facebook page and leave us a comment. Noah Pransky, 10 Investigates.
New developments tonight in 10 Investigates' ongoing series on Sheriff Grady Judd's undercover sex stings. Now a local ACLU leader is calling for a federal audit following our story.
Since this is federal money that's involved here, get the Justice Department to take a look to find out whether they're actually following the rules or not.
Retired Army Colonel Mike Feniger has held leadership positions with the ACLU's national, state, and local boards, and he expressed concern over Polk County Sheriff Grady Judd's apparent disregard for due process. 10 Investigates exposed entrapment issues in the local stings and how many charges were being dropped. But Sheriff Judd, who oversees the local task force, indicated he was going to call these men criminals even if they were cleared of wrongdoing.
I was very disappointed in Sheriff Judd's comments that the criminal justice system just doesn't work, and therefore he is the person who's going to tell the community who the sexual offenders are and whose lives he's decided to go ahead and ruin. That's reprehensible.
Our story questioning the effectiveness of these things continues online tonight, so read our latest discoveries and leave us your thoughts on WTSP.com. In the newsroom, Noah Pransky, 10 Investigates.
Earlier this month, we showed how officers were crossing the lines to boost arrest totals and then taking vital resources away from other areas of crime fighting.
Well, tonight, investigative reporter Noah Pransky uncovers how the military has been involved too, possibly breaking federal law.
Local law enforcement agencies have refused to turn over public records regarding how their undercover sex stings operate. But we got our hands on some through the courts, and they didn't just reveal entrapment issues, but also what seems to be the illegal use of military resources in these stings.
He was charged by the U.S. Air Force Office of Special Investigations.
Last spring, Pinellas County Sheriff Bob Gualtieri and Clearwater's police chief at the time, Anthony Holloway, ran an operation to catch men looking online for vulnerable children. But mistakes were made, and men who were not looking for kids were arrested too. Like a Miami man who answered this ad detectives didn't want us to have. It was for an 18-year-old woman. The two adults swapped 200 messages over 2 days, ultimately agreeing to meet on Clearwater Beach. But the woman, really an Air Force investigator, forgot to switch her age from 18 to 14 until he had already driven 300 miles to her house. When the man still wanted to see who he had been chatting with, he was arrested. It's cost him his job, thousands of dollars, and possibly his freedom.
Sometimes in the zeal to do the right thing, law enforcement has a tendency to step over lines.
Stetson Law Professor Charlie Rose retired from the Army JAG Corps, and aside from the entrapment issue, he questions why the Air Force was involved in targeting civilians in the first place. Federal law prohibits the military from enforcing state laws, yet court records indicate the investigator out of MacDill spent 4 days in a Clearwater Beach hotel chatting up potential targets. When he didn't land service members, he targeted civilians.
I spend the day doing this thing and I don't ever arrest a soldier or an airman or a sailor, and the only people that are getting arrested are civilians. That sort of defies common sense.
Pinellas County Sheriff Bob Gualtieri said he didn't remember how the Air Force investigator got involved.
I'm not sure, to be honest with you.
But the operational plan from his sting indicated from the very beginning the agent would be doing the same job as local detectives, chatting up civilians online. Now, a motion filed Wednesday by defense attorney Peter Aiken makes the claim that charges against the Miami man should be dropped because of the violations in federal law. An Air Force spokesperson couldn't tell 10 Investigates how or why an agent would have been soliciting non-service members, but Rose says the Office of Special Investigations, or OSI, should be more concerned with military crimes that might affect national security.
Every moment that OSI agent has been doing this work for free for the civilian government is a time when he's not out investigating military cases and handling military issues.
Depending how a judge rules on this motion, it could have impact on a number of other cases around the state that the Air Force investigator was working on too. We'll continue to track the developments, as well as continue to fight for public records and transparency from law enforcement. In the newsroom, Noah Pransky, 10 Investigates. Reggie, our stories are prompting local law enforcement to clean up the way they conduct their stings. This past weekend, the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office arrested 11 more men who were willing to meet up with underage teens. But the numbers were far lower than previous stings, and this time, there were no teenagers targeted either. You've seen these scenes before, men arrested accused of traveling to meet an underage teen. But 10 Investigates proved many of them weren't online looking for kids, and many of them were just teens themselves. Since we started reporting on the problems, however, the arrest numbers have plummeted by 60 or 70%. Local attorneys, like Tampa's Tony Candela, say it's because detectives have stopped breaking so many rules to entrap men.
They're trying to toe the line a little bit more than they were, say, 6 months ago, because it had gotten so far upfield that they were doing things that was not productive. They're actually going after people that hadn't done anything wrong.
Pinellas County Sheriff Bob Galtieri, who didn't even hold a traditional press conference after this past weekend's sting, says they got 11 bad people off the street and maintains the changes from his detectives have been minimal.
Well, I don't think we're doing anything wrong to begin with. We're always very careful. Certainly never want to entrap anybody or entice anybody or do anything that's improper.
The sheriff acknowledged there was one mistake he corrected after we pointed it out. An Air Force investigator using the sting to target civilians, a clear violation of federal law.
That we did not have that person from the Air Force participating, and we won't in any future operations, because I do think that that's not something that we should have done.
But he does promise more future operations to get potential criminals off the street. We've been digging on this story for more than a year, and we also just reported exclusively on our website how some agencies have deleted key records we requested. Find out more on WTSP.com. Just click on the 10 Investigates link on the left side.
Well, an update tonight to a 10 Investigate series that's really gotten a lot of attention in 2014.
Investigative reporter Noah Pransky exposed how officers were breaking the rules to boost their arrest totals during To Catch a Predator style stings. Now the attention helped prompt positive change, and months later, he joins us from the newsroom again, still digging for the truth.
These stings are seldom challenged by the media outlets that have long benefited from their made-for-TV press conferences. But after reviewing hundreds of documents from dozens of agencies around Florida, we revealed a pattern of problems that included legal and ethical issues. And now we have more findings. We've already prompted prosecutors and the local sheriff to change the way the stings are operated to better ensure they aren't slapping sexual predator labels on men who aren't. But as we continue to fight for transparency, some agencies still won't turn over what we believe to be public records. Nevertheless, we've been able to document new evidence of officers stretching the truth and breaking the rules in order to arrest more men. We've also found how some agencies use these stings to take, then sell defendants' vehicles. We've published those details exclusively on WTSP.com. Just look for the 10 Investigates link on the left side. Count on us to continue to push for truth on this issue. In the newsroom, Noah Pransky, 10 Investigates.